The first mistake was believing the mountains were indifferent. They aren't. They're ancient, patient things, and they watch. They have a long memory for the warmth of sunlight and a longer one for the taste of blood. We were just four specks of bright color and loud laughter moving through their deep green veins, and we thought we were welcome. We thought the rustle of the leaves was applause, not a warning. That was our first mistake. Our last one was stopping to rest. We were 3 days into a week-long trek along a lesser-known trail in the heart of the Appalachians. For me, it was about washing the city grit from my soul. For my girlfriend, Chloe, it was about the pictures, the way the morning light speared through the canopy, the impossible blue of a mountain jay. For Maya, it was about the history, the folklore she'd read about in dog-eared books. And for Ben, well, for Ben, it was about proving his new $50 compass was better than the GPS on his phone. The air in my lungs tasted of pine and damp earth, clean and sharp. Chloe was a few feet ahead of me, pointing out a pattern in the moss on a monolithic boulder. "It looks like a map of a city, doesn't it, Liam?" I smiled. "Only you would find a metropolis on a rock." Maya was poking at a vibrant orange fungus on a fallen log, while Ben, predictably, was lagging behind. "Hold up," he called out from about 30 yards back down the trail. "Strap on my pack came loose." We stopped, taking the opportunity to pull out our water bottles. The forest was humming with life, a constant, low-grade thrum of insects and distant birdsong. The silence that lived underneath that hum was profound, a deep, listening kind of quiet. I'd always found it peaceful. That was about to change. "All good?" I shouted back after a minute. No answer. Chloe looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Ben, come on. We'll lose the light." Still nothing, just the indifferent hum of the woods. I felt a prickle of irritation. This was classic Ben, getting distracted by some weird bug or trying to get the perfect panoramic shot with his phone. "I'll go grab him," I said, starting back down the path. I'd taken maybe 5 steps when the sound of frantic crashing through the undergrowth reached us. It came from our left, from the dense thicket of rhododendrons off the trail. We all froze. The sound was getting closer, a desperate, panicked scramble. A deer, maybe? A bear? Then Ben burst through the foliage, stumbling onto the path. His face was pale, streaked with dirt. His chest heaved with ragged, gasping breaths. He didn't have his pack on. "Ben!" Chloe cried out, rushing toward him. "What happened? Are you okay?" He couldn't speak, just bent over, hands on his knees, sucking in air like a drowning man. He shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. "A bear," he finally gasped, pointing a trembling finger back into the woods he'd just emerged from. "A big one. It stood up, just stood there." My blood ran cold. A black bear standing up was a sign of aggression, dominance. We were in its territory. "Where's your pack?" I asked, my voice tight. "Dropped it," he panted. "Just ran. We need to go, now." There was no arguing with that level of primal fear. Adrenaline surged through me. We weren't armed, not for anything bigger than a snake. We abandoned our rest, grabbing our things. "Which way?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "Forward. Fast." Ben choked out, and he started running up the trail, a desperate, clumsy gait. We followed without a second thought, our hiking boots pounding against the packed earth. We ran, fueled by his terror, casting panicked glances over our shoulders, expecting to see a hulking black shape emerge from the trees at any moment. We ran for a solid 100 yards, the trail curving around a steep embankment. It was only when Ben finally slowed, collapsing against a tree, that we dared to stop. My lungs burned. Chloe was leaning against me, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I think we lost it," Ben wheezed, and that's when we heard it. A calm, casual voice from back down the trail, around the bend we just sprinted past, that had, "Hey, what's the rush?" We all froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The voice was unmistakable. It was clear, unhurried, and perfectly normal. It was Ben's. Slowly, his pack slung comfortably over one shoulder, the real Ben walked into view. He had a curious, slightly annoyed look on his face. "I told you guys my strap was busted. I turned around and you were all gone, running like you saw a ghost." I stared at him, at his clean face, his calm demeanor, his steady breathing. Then I looked at the man leaning against the tree beside me. The man with the pale, dirt-streaked face, wide eyes, and heaving chest. The copy of Ben. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. It felt like a dream, a glitch in reality. The real Ben's eyes landed on the double, and his face went slack with confusion, then disbelief, then a dawn of horror that mirrored our own. "What the hell?" the real Ben whispered. I turned my head back to the imposter. He was still breathing heavily, but his eyes were locked on me. The panic in them was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something hollow and ancient and intelligent. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched its lips, and then it was gone. It didn't run. It didn't fade. It was like my eyes blinked, and in that split second of darkness, it had simply ceased to exist. The space where it had been standing was just empty air. For a long moment, there was only the sound of our own ragged breathing. "Did you guys see that?" Maya's voice was a bare whisper. "Please tell me you saw that." "I saw it," Chloe breathed, her fingers digging into my arm. Our Ben, stumbled forward, his face the color of ash. "Who was that? What was that?" It looked exactly like me. Panic began to set in, a cold, sharp-toothed thing. We babbled over each other, trying to make sense of the impossible. A prank? Who could have pulled that off? A long-lost twin? Out here? The rational explanations were more insane than the truth our eyes had shown us. The imposter's fear had been a perfect performance. It had used Ben's own face to make us run, to play with us. An unsettling thought wormed its way into my mind. When we'd first stopped, Ben had been behind us. The thing that looked like him had come from the woods to our left, and our real Ben had come from the trail behind us. They had come from two different directions. As if to punctuate our terror, the forest began to change. The golden afternoon light grew dim, as if a storm was rolling in. But there were no clouds. Instead, a fog began to rise from the forest floor. It wasn't a normal fog that rolls down from the peaks. This stuff was different. It was thick and unnaturally white, and it didn't drift on the breeze. It crawled. It slithered out from between the trees and snaked across the forest floor like a living entity, cold and damp and smelling of wet soil and decay. Within minutes, it was up to our waists. The trees 30 feet away became gray, ghostly silhouettes. The trail behind us vanished. The trail ahead was swallowed. The world shrank to a tiny, suffocating circle of visibility. Ben pulled out his compass. He held it flat in his palm. The needle wasn't just confused, it was spinning, whirling around and around like a broken clock hand. "No, no, no," he muttered, shaking it as if that would fix it. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. The vibrant, humming forest of 10 minutes ago was gone. In its place was a silent, gray purgatory. The fog muffled all sound, swallowing the bird song and the insect hum. The only sound left was the frantic pounding of my own heart. We were blind, lost, and being hunted by something that could wear the face of a friend. "We need to stick together," I said, my voice sounding thin and weak in the oppressive silence. "No one gets more than arm's length from anyone else. We keep moving. We have to find the trail." We huddled close, a tight knot of fear, and pushed forward into the gray nothingness. Every twisted branch looked like a lurking figure. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like a whisper. Was it mimicking the wind, too? We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch told me it was only 45 minutes. The fog never thinned. If anything, it grew thicker, pressing in on us, cold and clammy against our skin. The forest itself seemed to grow more hostile. The path we were trying to follow dissolved into a maze of gnarled roots and slick, moss-covered rocks. Thorny vines snagged at our clothes like desperate fingers. It felt like the woods were actively trying to trip us, to separate us, to hold us there. It was Maya who saw it first. "Look," she whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. Through a slightly thinner patch of fog, a dark shape loomed, a hard, angular silhouette against the soft gray of the mist. It was a structure, a cabin. It was small and dilapidated, its wooden walls stained nearly black by decades of rain and rot. The roof was rusted tin, bent and buckled in places. A single grimy window stared out at us like a cataract-clouded eye. A stone chimney leaned precariously to one side. It was the last place on earth I'd ever want to seek shelter, but in that moment, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. A refuge. Walls. A door that could be locked. "We have to," Chloe said, reading my thoughts. "We can't stay out here tonight. Not with that thing." Ben nodded, his earlier skepticism completely evaporated. "A fire. We can build a fire, stay there till the fog lifts." We approached it cautiously, half expecting the thing that wore Ben's face to be standing on the dilapidated porch. But it was empty, save for a carpet of rotting leaves. The wooden door hung crookedly on one hinge. I pushed it open. It swung inward with a long, groaning shriek that scraped at my nerves. The air that billowed out was thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, something faintly metallic and unpleasant, like old blood. The inside was a single small room. A crude stone fireplace dominated one wall, choked with ancient ash. A rickety table and two chairs stood in the center of the room, coated in a thick layer of gray dust. In the corner was a small bed frame, its mattress a stained, lumpy disaster that looked like animals had nested in it. It was grim. It was disgusting. But it was a shelter. We shuffled inside, the four of us, and I immediately pushed the heavy wooden door shut. There was a thick wooden bar on the inside, and with a collective effort, we managed to lift it and slide it into its iron brackets. The solid thump as it settled into place was the most comforting sound I had ever heard. For a moment, we just stood there in the dim, dusty light filtering through the single dirty window, breathing. We were out of the fog. We were out of the open. We had walls between us and the smiling thing that walked in the woods. We felt a flicker of hope. We thought we were safe. We were wrong. We had just locked ourselves inside its hunting blind. Hope is a fragile thing in a place like that. It's a flickering candle in a hurricane, and the four of us were cupping our hands around it, desperately trying to shield it from the inevitable. For a few precious minutes, the solid thump of that wooden bar locking into place was the only sound in the universe. It was the sound of a reprieve, a breath. We took a collective inventory of our new home. The single room was maybe 15 by 15 feet. The dust was so thick it felt like a blanket thrown over every surface. In the dim light from the grimy window, I could see cobwebs, thick and gray as shrouds, hanging from the low-ceiling beams. The air was heavy, unmoving. "Okay," Ben said, breaking the silence. His voice was all business, a forced pragmatism that I knew was his shield against the terror. "Okay, we stay here, wait for the fog to lift. It can't last forever." "We need a fire," Chloe added, her arms wrapped around herself. "It's getting cold." The fireplace was a black, gaping maw. I knelt and peered inside. It was choked with the skeletal remains of old logs and a thick carpet of soot and ash. A quick search of the cabin yielded nothing in the way of firewood. "There's nothing dry in here," I announced. "I'm gonna have to find some outside. Something under a ledge, maybe." "No," Chloe said instantly, her voice sharp. "Liam, no. You can't go out there." "I'll be quick," I argued, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We need the heat. More importantly, we need the light. I'm not spending the night in here in the dark. None of us are." The thought of being plunged into total blackness, trapped in this tiny box with only our imaginations for company, was somehow more terrifying than a quick trip outside. Reluctantly, they agreed. Ben helped me lift the heavy bar. The groan of the door opening felt like a violation, letting the cold, gray fog seep back into our sanctuary. "Be fast," Maya whispered, her eyes wide. "Don't go far." I slipped outside, leaving the door cracked just enough to see the sliver of dusty light from within. The cold was immediate, biting. The fog was a physical presence, wrapping around me, muffling the world. I stayed close to the cabin wall, my eyes scanning the ground. Most of the wood was soaked through, but near the foundation, tucked under the slight overhang of the roof, was a small pile of branches and split logs. They were damp, but not saturated. It was old, but it would have to do. As I bent down, stuffing splintery pieces of wood under my arm, my gaze drifted past the corner of the cabin to a shape in the fog. It was a tree. A massive, gnarled oak, far older than the pines and birches surrounding it. It stood alone, a dark colossus in the gray. There was something odd about its trunk. It was scarred. Curiosity, a stupid and dangerous impulse, got the better of me. I crept closer, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The scars weren't random, they were deliberate. Carvings, names, dozens of them, etched into the bark over years, maybe centuries. Some were so old and weathered they were barely legible, the bark having swollen and grown around them. John S., 1924, Eliza M., 1887, William P., 1956. It was a graveyard of memories. Then my flashlight, which I'd clicked on in the gloom, caught a patch of pale, fresh wood. My breath hitched. This carving was new. The edges were sharp, the wood inside the cuts still the color of bone. Sap, thick and amber-colored, was still weeping from the wounds in the bark. There was a name. Maya. My blood turned to ice water. It was her name, carved in crude, angry letters. My mind screamed in denial. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But my eyes were drawn to the date carved directly beneath it. It wasn't a year. It was a full date. September 21st, 2024. I pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my pale, trembling face. No signal, of course, but the date on the lock screen was clear, Saturday, September 20th. The date on the tree was tomorrow. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't a memorial. It was a ledger, a prophecy. I stumbled back from the tree, the firewood falling from my arms and thudding softly onto the damp ground. I felt its presence behind me, the ancient silent witness. It felt like the cabin was the bait, and this tree was the headstone, prepared in advance. My first instinct was to scream. My second was to run back inside and tell them what I'd found. But how could I? How could I look Maya in the eye and tell her I'd found her name on a tombstone with a due date? The fragile thread of sanity holding our group together would snap. Panic would consume us. I scooped up the fallen wood, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the logs. I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them. Not yet. I would get us through the night, and in the morning, in the light of day, we would leave this place and never look back. The carving would become just another ghost story we told. It had to. I returned to the cabin, slamming the door behind me and ramming the bar home with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. "Did you find any?" Chloe asked, her voice a welcome anchor to reality. "Enough for a while," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. I dumped the wood by the hearth, avoiding their eyes, terrified they would see the horror in mine. While I'd been outside confronting our future, they had been uncovering the past. Chloe was standing by the rickety table, holding a small, leather-bound book. It looked like a journal. Maya and Ben were peering over her shoulder. "We found it under the bed mattress," Maya said. "Listen to this." Chloe cleared her throat, her voice trembling slightly as she read from a yellowed page. The handwriting was a frantic, spidery scrawl. October 12th, 1973. It came again last night. It made the sound of my wife crying. But Eleanor has been dead for 7 years. I did not open the door. The Lord gives me strength, but I fear my strength is waning. It is a hollow thing. It has no voice of its own, only the echoes of those it has heard. A thief of sounds. She flipped a few pages. October 15th. I saw it in the moonlight. It wore the shape of a deer, but it walked on 2 legs. Its smile, God forgive me, its smile, it knows I am in here. It is patient. It is hungry for more than just my flesh. It wants my voice. It wants to add me to its song. A cold dread settled over the room, so thick I could taste it. A hollow thing, a thief of sounds. The words echoed the impossible thing we had seen, the imposter Ben with its perfect stolen panic. "What is this thing?" Ben whispered, all his pragmatism gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "Some of the local tribes, the Cherokee," Maya began, her voice barely audible. "They have stories, legends, of a spearfinger, a shapeshifter, something that can take the form of people, that mimics voices to lure children into the woods. That's just a story," Ben snapped, but his protest was weak, desperate. "So was the man who looked exactly like you, but wasn't you, right?" Maya shot back. "We got the fire started. It was a pathetic, smoky thing at first, the damp wood hissing and spitting in protest, but slowly, warmth began to push back against the oppressive cold. The flames cast long, dancing shadows that made the small room seem both smaller and infinitely larger, the corners filled with writhing darkness. We sat huddled together on the floor, as close to the hearth as we could get, a tiny island of warmth in an ocean of cold, silent dread. Night fell. It didn't so much arrive as it did thicken. The gray light in the window slowly faded to a deep, impenetrable black. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only our room, the crackling fire, and the darkness pressing in on the thin wooden walls. And then the sounds began. It started from below us, a soft, dry scratching from under the floorboards. "Scrap! Drag! Scrap!" We all froze, our eyes darting to the floor. It sounded like something large, something heavy, dragging itself through the crawl space beneath our feet. Was it trying to get in? Ben grabbed the heaviest piece of firewood, holding it like a club, his eyes wide in the firelight. Ben, ever the pragmatist, even in the face of the impossible, couldn't let it go. While the rest of us were frozen, imagining the horrors that lurked below, he was on his hands and knees, pressing his ear to the grimy floor planks. It's moving toward the back corner, he whispered, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and analytical focus. Whatever it is, it's not a raccoon. It's too heavy. Just leave it, Ben. Chloe pleaded, her voice a strained whisper. Don't draw its attention. It already knows we're here, he shot back, crawling toward the corner. He ran his hands over the floor, his fingers probing the gaps between the boards. These old cabins, sometimes they have a root cellar, a storm shelter. His eyes lit up with a desperate, frantic hope. What if there's another way out? The word out hung in the air, a beautiful, impossible dream. A way out that didn't involve plunging back into the fog with the thing that wore our faces. I found myself crawling over to join him, the need to do something overriding the paralysis of fear. The scratching had stopped, replaced by an expectant silence that felt even more menacing. Ben's fingers found their purchase. Here, he grunted. This one's loose. He worked his fingertips into the crack and pulled. The floorboard, its tongue and groove rotted away by decades of damp, lifted with a soft groan of splintering wood. A wave of cold, musty air washed over our faces, smelling of wet earth, rotting potatoes, and something else, something rank and animal. We peered into the blackness below. It was a hole, about 3 feet square, a dark, gaping mouth leading down into the guts of the earth. From the darkness, a crude wooden ladder, slick with mildew, ascended into our view. It was a cellar. For a moment, nobody moved. The fire cast flickering, orange light that only seemed to make the hole darker. It felt like staring into a grave. I'm going down, Ben said, his voice resolute. He was already swinging his legs over the edge. Are you insane? Chloe hissed. We just heard something moving around down there. And I want to know what it was, Ben countered, his face grim in the firelight. More than that, I want to see if there's a way out. A tunnel, an old cellar door, anything. Are you content to just sit here and wait for that thing to come get us? He had a point. A terrible, terrifying point. Waiting was its own kind of torture. I'll go with you, I said, the words tasting like ash. Chloe, Maya, stay here. Keep the fire going. Yell if you see or hear anything. Chloe grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. Liam, don't. We have to, I said, pulling my arm gently from her grasp. We'll be quick. I handed Chloe the heavy log we'd been using as a makeshift club and clicked on my high-powered flashlight. Ben had his own smaller one. With a final grim nod, he disappeared into the hole. I followed, my boots finding the slimy rungs of the ladder. The cold, damp air enveloped me. The smell was stronger here, a thick, cloying stench of decay. The world narrowed to the bobbing circles of our flashlight beams. We reached the bottom. Our feet sank an inch into the soft, loamy soil. We were in a small, cramped space, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet, the ceiling of floorboards just inches above our heads. Thick, ancient cobwebs brushed against our faces like dead hands. The walls were a mixture of exposed earth and crumbling stone foundation, riddled with a pale, vein-like network of roots. See anything? I whispered, my voice sounding loud and intrusive in the subterranean quiet. No exit, Ben muttered, sweeping his light across the far wall. Just dirt and rock. The flicker of hope we'd nurtured died a quick, cold death. This wasn't an escape route. It was a tomb. As my light danced across the earthen walls, it caught on something. Scratches. Not from an animal, but deliberate marks tallied in groups of 5. Dozens of them. Someone had been trapped down here, counting the days. My beam drifted lower and landed on a small object nestled in the dirt. I knelt, my heart pounding. It was a bird, carved from a single piece of wood, its wings half spread. It was worn smooth, clearly a child's toy, dropped and forgotten decades ago. I imagined a small hand, clutching this bird in the darkness, listening to the same shuffling sounds we had heard. Liam, look, Ben whispered, his voice strained. He was pointing his flashlight at a low, dark opening at the base of the far wall, an opening we hadn't noticed at first. It was a tunnel, barely 2 feet high, dug directly into the earth. It was just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Hope, that stubborn, idiotic weed, grew back instantly. A way out, I breathed. Maybe, Ben said, though his voice was tight with apprehension, or maybe just a burrow for some animal. It's big enough for a person, I said, already moving toward it. Someone could have dug this. This is why I tried to escape. The smell of rot was almost overpowering near the tunnel's entrance. Ben hesitated. I don't like this, man. I have to look, I said. Just a few feet. I got down on my hands and knees, the damp soil soaking through my jeans, and aimed my flashlight into the suffocating darkness of the tunnel. It stretched for maybe 15-20 feet before curving out of sight. It was a desperate, clawed-out passage, the walls studded with rocks and thick, severed roots. I took a breath and crawled in. The claustrophobia was immediate and absolute. The earthen walls pressed in on me, the low ceiling forcing my head down. I could hear the sound of my own frantic breathing, the rasp of my clothes against the dirt. Ben was right behind me, his muttered curses the only other sound. "See anything?" he asked, his voice muffled. "It keeps going," I said, shuffling forward. My light cut through the blackness. The air was dead and cold. I crawled another few feet, rounding the gentle curve, and my flashlight beam fell on the end of the tunnel. It was a dead end. A solid wall of rock and thick, interwoven roots blocked the way. My heart sank. Chipped rocks and discarded, broken sticks lay on the ground, the crude, failed tools of a previous captive. They had tried to dig their way to freedom and failed, but that wasn't what made the blood freeze in my veins. At the base of the rock wall, nestled in a small, scooped-out depression in the dirt, was a pile of them. They were small and white, gleaming in the beam of my light. Some were yellowed, some cracked, molars, incisors, canines. It was a small, neat pile of human teeth. A guttural sound of pure revulsion escaped my throat. This wasn't an escape tunnel. This was a den. This was its pantry. The scratching we'd heard, it hadn't been an animal. It had been the creature, right here, beneath our feet in its lair. "What? What is it?" Ben's voice was sharp with panic behind me. I couldn't speak. I just held the light on the small, horrific pile. I heard him gasp, a wet, choking sound. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh my God." We scrambled backward, a clumsy, panicked retreat, our limbs flailing in the tight space. We burst out of the tunnel back into the cellar, gasping for air as if we'd been underwater. We didn't need to say anything. We both understood. The cabin wasn't a fortress built on solid ground. It was a lid on a box, a flimsy wooden raft floating on an ocean of darkness. And the monster wasn't just circling us. It was living in the depths below. We scrambled up the ladder, our hands slipping on the damp rungs. Chloe and Maya looked down at us, their faces etched with worry. "What did you find?" Chloe asked. "Nothing," I gasped, heaving myself back into the relative safety of the room. No way out. I couldn't tell them about the teeth. I couldn't add that particular horror to the pile. Ben and I shoved the floorboard back into place, sealing the grave below us. But it didn't matter. We couldn't unknow what we now knew. We were not in a shelter. We were in its nest, and we had just trespassed in its bedroom. The sounds we'd heard before were nothing. Now it knew we knew, and the games were about to truly begin. The sound continued for a minute, moving from one side of the cabin to the other, before finally fading into silence. We sat in breathless anticipation. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It was a loaded silence, filled with the promise of more. And the promise was kept. A whisper. From outside, so faint it could have been the wind. "Liam," it was Chloe's voice, a perfect imitation. My head snapped toward her, but she was right beside me, her face pale, her eyes confirming she'd heard it too. "Ben, let me in. I'm scared." This time it was Maya's voice, a pleading, childlike whimper that sent a spear of ice through my gut. "It's playing with us," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Don't listen. It's not real." The whispers stopped, the silence returned, heavier this time, suffocating. We were prey in a cage and the predator was tapping on the bars, enjoying our fear. I stared into the fire, focusing on the flames, trying to block out the world. I thought of the carving on the tree. Maya. Tomorrow. The word pounded in my skull like a funeral drum. And then came the laughter. It started with a single happy chuckle. It was Chloe's laugh, the one she does when I tell a stupid joke. It came from the darkness right outside the window. It was so perfect, so genuine, that for a split second my brain accepted it before the horror caught up. Then another sound joined it. Ben's sarcastic snort of a laugh from the other side of the cabin. Then Maya's light, airy giggle, seeming to come from the roof above us. Then my own. I heard my own laugh, a deep, hearty sound, join the chorus. It was a phantom echo of a happy memory, of us sitting around a campfire days ago, sharing jokes. It had heard us. It had recorded us. And now it was playing our joy back to us as a weapon. The laughter grew. It began to overlap, the individual sounds multiplying. Two Chloes. 4 Bens, a dozen Mayas, a score of me. It was a cacophony of madness, a swirling vortex of our own happiness twisted into a terrifying, mocking symphony. It wasn't coming from one place anymore. It was coming from everywhere at once, as if a crowd of our own doppelgängers were surrounding the cabin, clutching their sides in hysterical, soulless mirth. We clapped our hands over our ears, but we couldn't block it out. It was a psychological assault. It was the sound of our friendship, our love, our light, being consumed and regurgitated by an obscene darkness. Maya was rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. "Make it stop," she sobbed. "Please, make it stop." And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that slammed back into place was deafening, leaving a phantom ringing in my ears. The silence wasn't a relief. It was an accusation. It was the sound of the air settling after a bomb had gone off, thick with the fallout of what we'd just experienced. The phantom ringing in my ears was laced with ghost laughter, the faint, dying echo of our stolen joy. I looked at Chloe, at Ben, their faces pale and slick with sweat in the firelight. We were hollowed out. How could we ever truly laugh again without remembering this, without hearing that monstrous chorus mocking us from the shadows of our own minds? The creature hadn't just attacked our cabin, it had laid siege to our memories. It was a parasite that fed on the happiest moments of our lives, turning them into instruments of torture. In that moment, I understood what the journal meant by a thief of sounds. It didn't just steal the sound, it stole the meaning behind it. It had taken our laughter and left us with only the ragged, terrified sound of our own breathing in a dusty, forgotten room. The silence it left behind was not empty, it was occupied. It was the sound of something vast and ancient, listening, waiting for us to make another sound it could steal. It was in that ringing silence that Maya looked at the window. Maybe she was looking for the source of the noise. Maybe she was just cracking under the pressure, her eyes, wide and reflecting the firelight, fixed on the grimy pane of glass. Her breath hitched. The color drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, translucent white. She didn't scream. She just made a small, choked, whimpering sound. "Maya?" Chloe whispered, reaching for her. "What is it?" Maya didn't answer. She just pointed a trembling finger at the window. Slowly, reluctantly, I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing but our own terrified reflections superimposed over the blackness outside. Then, a shape resolved itself in the darkness beyond the glass. It was standing just at the edge of the firelight's reach. It was tall and gaunt, shaped something like a wolf or a coyote, but it was standing on 2 long, jointed legs, its posture unnervingly human. Its fur was the color of charcoal and shadow, but it was the face that made my soul recoil. Its head was tilted as if in curiosity, and it was smiling. It was not the snarl of an animal. It was a wide, deliberate, human-like smile. Its lips, thin and black, were pulled back to reveal its teeth. They were not the fangs of a canine. They were human teeth, dozens of them, too many of them, square and white and unnervingly perfect, like a denture commercial from hell. We stared at it, paralyzed, a tableau of silent horror. The smiling wolf thing stared back. Its eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of anything but a cold, predatory hunger. It stood perfectly still, holding that ghastly, impossibly wide grin. Then, as we watched, the smile vanished. It didn't fade, it didn't fall. It switched off like a light. One moment it was there, a rictus of pure malice, and the next its face was a blank, featureless mask of fur. Its mouth was a thin, neutral line. It held the blank expression for a single, terrifying heartbeat. Then it turned and melted back into the impenetrable darkness, as silent as a ghost. Maya finally screamed. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a thin, hopeless, tearing sound that seemed to be ripped from the deepest part of her. It was the sound of a mind breaking. And as I held her, trying to comfort her while my own body trembled uncontrollably, I knew with a chilling certainty that the prophecy on the tree was not a warning. It was an appointment. Maya's scream eventually dissolved into ragged, hysterical sobs. We pulled her away from the window, away from the sight of that impossible, smiling thing, and huddled her between us in front of the dying fire. She was trembling so violently I was afraid she would shake apart. She kept muttering, her voice a broken mantra. "Tomorrow. It's tomorrow. It knows." None of us tried to correct her. None of us offered the empty platitude that it was just a coincidence. We had all seen the fresh carving in the tree. We had all seen the smiling creature at the window. To deny the connection now would be to deny the reality of our own terror. We were living in a folktale, and the old stories don't believe in coincidences. The rest of the night was a waking nightmare. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Every time one of us would start to drift off, a sound from outside would jolt us back to panicked awareness. A twig snapping, a soft dragging sound in the leaves, a single perfect mimic of a bird call that had no place in the dead of night. The creature was out there, circling us, patient as a spider. It was letting us marinate in our own fear. We didn't speak. What was there to say? We were four people trapped in a box, waiting for a monster to come and claim one of us. The fire dwindled to a bed of glowing orange embers, casting just enough light to make the shadows in the corners of the room seem deep and threatening. I held Chloe's hand, her knuckles white as she gripped me back. Ben sat with his back against the wall, the heavy log held across his lap, his eyes fixed on the door. And Maya. Maya just stared into the dying embers, her face a blank mask of resignation. Dawn, when it finally came, offered no relief. It was not a triumphant sunrise banishing the shadows, it was just a slow, grudging shift from impenetrable black to a suffocating, featureless gray. The fog was still there, pressing against the window pane like a blindfold. The world was still a prison, and the walls had not moved. The date had turned. It was Sunday, September 21st. The prophecy was no longer in the future, it was now. The mood in the cabin was funereal. The fragile bonds of our friendship, stretched to the breaking point by the night's horrors, finally began to snap. It started with Ben. "We have to leave," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Now. We just run for it." "Run where?" Chloe shot back, her voice sharp with exhaustion and fear. "Into that? We can't see 10 feet. We'd be separated in a minute. That's what it wants." "So what's your plan?" Ben retorted, getting to his feet. "We sit here and wait for it to pick us off? We saw the tree, Chloe. We know what day it is. Are we just going to let it happen?" He gestured toward Maya, who didn't even flinch at being the subject of his panicked argument. "We can't just abandon her," Chloe cried, her voice cracking. "I'm not abandoning anyone," Ben yelled, his control finally shattering. "I'm trying to survive. What if it's after all of us? What if she's just first?" The ugly word hung in the air between us. First. It reframed our situation from a shared struggle to a sequence of executions. "Stop it," I said, my voice low and heavy. "Both of you, fighting is what it wants. It's feeding on this." My words did little to quell the toxic atmosphere. We were broken. The thing outside hadn't needed to break down the door. It had simply whispered through the cracks and let us turn on ourselves. And then it began its final, cruelest trick. A sound came from the woods, a soft, muffled crying. "Help me. Please. I'm hurt." It was Chloe's voice, a perfect, flawless imitation filled with pain and terror. My real Chloe was right beside me. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. We all stared at the door, our blood running cold. "Don't listen," I said, my voice a strained whisper. "It's the mimic. It's trying to lure us out." "Liam, please," the voice outside cried, more desperate this time. "I fell. I think my leg is broken. It's so cold out here. Why are you leaving me?" It was a masterpiece of psychological torture. It was using our love and our loyalty against us. Ben looked at me, his face a mess of confusion and dawning horror. How does it know to use your name?" It had been listening, all this time, to every word. The one person we thought would be immune to the trick was Maya. She had been catatonic, lost in her own world of despair. But the sound of her friend, seemingly in agony, pierced through her fog. Her head lifted, a flicker of life, of purpose returned to her eyes. "Chloe," she whispered. "Maya." "No," the real Chloe said, grabbing her arm. "That's not me. I'm right here." But the voice outside was relentless. "It's coming back. I can hear it. Please don't leave me here to die." That was the breaking point. Maya ripped her arm from Chloe's grasp. Her eyes were wild, filled with a strange, terrifying clarity. Maybe she believed the trick, or maybe she knew it was a lie and simply didn't care anymore. Maybe she decided that facing the monster was better than waiting for it in a cage. "I'm not letting it get you," she said, her voice eerily calm. She wasn't looking at Chloe, but through her at the door. "Maya, stop!" I shouted, lunging for her. But she was fast. Before Ben or I could reach her, she scrambled to the door and frantically, desperately, began to lift the heavy wooden bar. It was too heavy for her to move quickly. For a few seconds, she struggled, her muscles straining, the thick wood groaning as it scraped against the iron brackets. We were almost on her when she finally heaved it free. The door swung open. The gray, silent fog billowed in. Without a moment's hesitation, Maya ran out into it. "Maya!" Chloe screamed, her real voice raw with anguish. I ran to the doorway, Ben right behind me. We could see her, a fading silhouette, for only a second before the mist swallowed her whole. "Stay here!" I yelled at Chloe and Ben and plunged into the fog after her. "Maya!" I bellowed, my voice sounding dead and flat in the thick air. "Come back!" For a moment there was only silence. I couldn't see anything but the swirling gray. I had lost her. And then from somewhere in the mist ahead of me came her scream. It was not a scream of fear, it was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. A wet, tearing sound that was cut off with a sickening, abrupt finality. Silence. I stood frozen on the spot, every muscle in my body locked tight. The silence that followed was the most profound and terrifying I have ever known. It was the sound of a prophecy being fulfilled. The sound of a life being erased. Slowly, my limbs like lead, I backed away, back toward the faint, rectangular glow of the cabin doorway where Ben and Chloe stood, their faces masks of horror. I stumbled back inside, and together, we slammed the door shut and rammed the bar back into place. We didn't speak, we just listened. The forest was utterly still. It felt like it was holding its breath. Then, a new sound began. The sound of something being dragged through the leaves. It was coming closer and closer. It stopped right outside the door. We huddled together, staring at the thick wood, waiting. The silence stretched for an eternity, and then we saw it. At the window. It was the wolf figure again, its tall, gaunt form emerging from the fog. But this time it was different. As it stood there, its form began to shimmer, to distort, like a heat haze. For a single, sickening moment, the canine features of its face twisted and melted, flowing like hot wax, and reformed into the face of Maya. Her eyes were wide open in a silent, unending scream. Her mouth was stretched in an O of agony. It was a perfect, fleeting snapshot of her final moment. Then, just as quickly, the face dissolved back into the monstrous, furry visage of the wolf. It looked at us, and it smiled that wide, human-toothed smile. Its mouth opened, wider this time, impossibly wide, the jaw unhinging with a soft, wet pop. And as it did, the human-like teeth clicked and grated against each other, a dry, chattering sound like stones in a grinder. The smile vanished, the face going blank. Then, from that impossibly wide maw, a voice emerged. It was not a roar or a growl. It was a soft, gentle whisper. It was Maya's voice. "It's so cold," it whispered. The three of us broke. Chloe let out a long, wailing cry of grief and terror. Ben was hyperventilating, his eyes rolling back in his head. And I just felt something inside me snap. The part of my brain that tried to make sense of the world, that tried to find logic, just gave up. The cabin was not a shelter. It was a tomb. And the monster outside was not just a killer, it was a collector. It took your body, your face, and your voice. It hollowed you out and wore you like a suit. "The window," Ben gasped, pointing a trembling finger. On the other side of the room, there was a second, smaller window, covered by a piece of rotting plywood. "We have to run," I said, the words feeling like gravel in my throat. "We run, and we don't stop. We don't look back. And no matter what you hear, you do not stop." The final, desperate flight had begun. While the creature was still savoring its victory at the front of the cabin, Ben and I tore the plywood from the back window. It came away with a screech of rusty nails. The opening was small, but big enough to squeeze through. Chloe went first, then Ben. As I was scrambling through, I heard the thing at the front of the cabin slam its body against the door. The wood groaned, splintering. It was coming in. I fell to the ground outside and we ran. We plunged headfirst into the gray, silent labyrinth of the fog-choked forest, the sound of the cabin door shattering behind us, the starting gun for the final horrifying chase. We ran. There was no thought, no strategy, just the primal animal instinct to flee. The fog was a cold, wet wall that we slammed into with every step. Branches whipped at our faces, snagging our clothes like thorny hands. The ground was a treacherous soup of slick mud and gnarled roots, trying to pull us down. Behind us, I could hear the creature. It wasn't running. It was moving with an unhurried, terrifying confidence, the sound of its heavy form dragging and crashing through the undergrowth. It knew it didn't have to rush. The fog was its ally. The forest was its hunting ground. This way, Ben yelled, his voice strained. He veered sharply to the left, toward a steep, rocky decline. Stay together, I screamed, grabbing Chloe's hand and pulling her along. We scrambled down the embankment, sliding on loose shale and wet leaves, our descent clumsy and chaotic. At the bottom, we were in a grove of thick, ancient pines that grew so close together their branches formed a low, dark ceiling. The fog was thinner here, but the darkness was deeper. And the creature began to speak again. She was so scared at the end, it whispered, using Maya's voice. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, a soft, conversational tone that was infinitely more horrifying than a scream. She called for you, Liam. She wondered why you let her go. Shut up, I screamed into the gloom, my voice raw. Don't listen to it, man, Ben panted, his back against a tree. It's trying to mess with us. Ben, the voice cooed, and this time it was a perfect copy of Ben's own voice, seeming to come from just a few feet behind him. You were right to want to run. They're just slowing you down. Ben spun around, his eyes wild, holding the log up like a weapon. There was nothing there. Stop it, he shrieked. Ben, it's not real. Chloe cried, her voice trembling. The mimicry became a dizzying whirlwind of sound. Maya's sobs came from our left. Ben's own voice urged him to run from our right. A perfect copy of my voice called Chloe's name from the darkness up ahead. It was chaos. It was a tactical assault designed to shred our senses, to break our cohesion, to make us doubt our own reality. And it worked. I can't think, Ben stammered, clutching his head. He looked at us, his eyes filled with a new, terrifying emotion. Suspicion. How do I know it's you? How do I know you're not one of them? Ben, look at me, I said, taking a step toward him. It's me. It's Liam. My foot snapped a twig. The sharp crack echoed in the enclosed space. From the direction of the sound, the creature let out a guttural, wet chuckle that belonged to no one we knew. It was its own voice, and it was close. Ben's nerve broke. With a wild cry, he bolted, running blindly into the dark maze of pine trees, away from us. Ben, no, I roared. We heard him crashing through the undergrowth for a few seconds, and then we heard a single terrified scream, cut short with the same sickening finality as Maya's. It was followed by a heavy, wet, tearing sound, then silence, a silence that was now twice as heavy, twice as final. Chloe collapsed against me, her body racked with silent sobs. Two of them were gone. We were all that was left. I held her, my own body numb with shock and a creeping, hopeless despair. We were just delaying the inevitable. We can't stop, I whispered, my voice hollow. We have to keep moving. We pushed on, slower now, more cautiously, stumbling through the oppressive gloom. We found a small rock outcropping, a shallow overhang that offered a sliver of shelter. We crawled inside, huddling together in the damp cold, our breath pluming in the air. We were exhausted, physically and emotionally shattered. For an hour, we sat in silence, listening. But the creature was quiet. It had fed. Maybe, I thought, with a desperate sliver of hope, maybe it was satisfied for now. Maybe it had lost us. Liam, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the frantic beating of my heart. What was it? The thing in the diary. It said it was hollow. I don't know, I said, shaking my head. It's a story made real, a nightmare that learned to walk. I don't think I can run anymore, she said, her voice small and broken. My legs, they won't stop shaking. I held her tighter. We rest, just for a little while, then we go. We'll find a road. We'll find help, I promise. It was a lie, and we both knew it. There was no help. There was no escape. There was only the fog, the forest, and the patient hunter. As if summoned by my thoughts, a sound reached us, the soft crunch of a footstep on leaves. It was close. I held my breath, pressing us further back into the shallow cave. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. A figure emerged from the fog. It was tall, human-shaped, and walking with a familiar gait. My blood ran cold. It was me. It was a perfect copy of me, right down to the tear in the sleeve of my jacket and the smudge of dirt on my cheek. It stopped at the edge of the clearing in front of our hiding spot, its head cocked as if listening. Chloe? It called out, and the voice was my own, filled with a convincing, desperate anxiety. Chloe, are you there? I got turned around. I think I lost it. The real me was frozen, my throat clamped shut with terror. Chloe stared, her eyes wide, shifting from me to the imposter. The thing that wore my face turned as if sensing our location, and its eyes met mine, and it smiled. The smile didn't belong on my face. It was too wide, too sharp, a predator's grin hiding behind my features. It took a step toward us. I scrambled out of the overhang, putting myself between it and Chloe. "Get back!" I snarled, my voice sounding weak and thin compared to its perfect copy. "Liam?" Chloe whispered from behind me, her voice trembling with confusion. The doppelganger shook its head, a pained expression on my face. "Chloe, don't listen to it. That's the creature. It took my form. Look at its eyes. Look!" I stared into my own face. Its eyes were filled with a cunning, malevolent intelligence. But to Chloe, in the dim gray light, could she see it? We were identical. "He's the fake one, Chloe," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm the real Liam. I swear to you." "No, I am," the creature insisted, its voice a perfect mimicry of my own desperation. "It's a trick. It wants to confuse you, to separate us. You have to choose." It was the ultimate act of psychological warfare. It had turned me into the weapon. Chloe looked back and forth between us, her face a canvas of pure, mind-shattering terror. She was looking for a sign, a tell, something to distinguish the man she loved from the monster that wore his skin. "Ask me something," I blurted out, a desperate idea forming. Something only I would know. Our first date. What did I spill on my shirt? The creature's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something that wasn't me passed through its eyes. "Red wine," I said quickly. "A whole glass of Cabernet." "Red wine," the creature repeated a second later, its mimicry perfect, but too slow. The hesitation was there. "It's him," Chloe breathed, a wave of relief and horror washing over her face. She took a half step toward me. The creature's face contorted, the mask of my features twisted into a snarl of pure rage. The game was over. With a speed that was not human, it lunged. Not at me. At her. I moved without thinking, throwing my body in front of hers. The impact was like being hit by a car. I was thrown to the ground, the air knocked from my lungs. The creature was on top of me, its weight immense, crushing. I looked up into my own face, now twisted into a mask of inhuman fury. Its mouth opened, unhinging, stretching impossibly wide. I saw the clicking, chattering, all too human teeth. Then Chloe was there, screaming, swinging a heavy, jagged rock she must have grabbed from the ground. She brought it down on the side of the creature's head with all her strength. There was a sickening, wet crunch. The thing that wore my face shrieked. A sound that was a horrifying mixture of my voice, Maya's, and Ben's, all layered over a high-pitched, inhuman screech. It recoiled, staggering back, one hand flying to its temple where the rock had struck. Its face began to fall apart. The features sagged and ran like melting wax, my face dissolving into a gray, featureless pulp. The shriek died in its throat as it stumbled back, its form flickering between the wolf, a shadowy humanoid, and something in between. It crashed back into the fog and was gone. For a long moment, there was only the sound of our own ragged breathing. Chloe helped me up, and we clung to each other, trembling. We had won. We had survived. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We ran until the fog began to thin, and the oppressive silence of the ancient forest was replaced by a distant, familiar hum. The sound of tires on pavement. When we stumbled out of the tree line and onto the shoulder of a winding mountain road, the afternoon sun felt like a divine blessing on my skin. We collapsed to our knees on the hot asphalt, blinking in the bright, beautiful, ordinary light. We were alive. We were free. 6 months later, the official report listed my friends as missing, presumed victims of exposure or an animal attack. They found the cabin, the blood, the strain. They found no bodies. They never would. I was the sole survivor, the sole witness. My story was recorded as the product of extreme trauma and psychosis. They said, I invented a monster to cope with the guilt of surviving when my friends did not. I spent 2 months in a psychiatric facility. My therapist, Dr. Aris, is a kind man. He says I'm making remarkable progress. He says the nightmares are becoming less frequent. He tells me that recovery is a long road, but that I am walking it. He says I am learning to live with the echoes. I'm good at telling him what he wants to hear. I tell him I know it wasn't real, that the mind can play powerful tricks. He smiles, a gentle, reassuring smile. I've been practicing my own smile in the mirror. Dr. Aris makes his final notes for our session. You're doing so well, Liam, he says, looking up at me. It's good to see you smiling again. I give him a smile now, the new one I've been practicing. It feels wide. It feels right. I feel much better, I say. My voice sounds perfectly normal, perfectly my own. He nods, satisfied, and clicks his pen shut. I close my mouth and my teeth make a soft, dry, clicking sound as they meet. He doesn't notice. Not yet.